Hey everybody, this is going to be a video about the brain. It's going to be part 2. There's also a part 1 on the brain. This is part 2, so you should check out both of them if you want to be prepared. I'll start out with a joke. Here's a good one. Where do little kid brains go in the summer? You don't know? To hippocamp us. Okay. All right. That's the worst joke I've ever told. Okay, let's move on. Where are we? Slideshow. Okay, this part 2 of the brain video, is going to be about the part of the brain that's the outer part of the brain. That humans have a lot more of this part of the brain than other animals. So what's going on there? We're going to call it the cerebral cortex. We're also going to look at how our brain can be split, and we're going to look at left-right differences in the brain. First of all, what is the cerebral cortex? It is the intricate fiber of interconnected neural cells that covers the cerebral hemispheres, the body's ultimate control and information processing center. So on this view over here, all of this pinkish material that's up top is the cerebral cortex. In real life, it's gray. It's all gray. And this is kind of this view is an exterior view, and it's showing you all the colored stuff is in the middle. And this is showing you half the brain. If you split the brain down the middle, you'd see all these other parts we already talked about in the other video, and you'd see half of the cerebral cortex. Okay. So, in this illustration, it's coloring the cerebral cortex 4 different colors. You have the frontal lobe that is up underneath the forehead, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe. And so the frontal lobe is a lot of our thinking and judgment and planning. The parietal lobe is a lot of our sense of touch. The temporal lobe, think tempo and hearing, our sense of hearing. And the occipital lobe is where we process sight. Okay, on the cortex, different parts of it do different things, and there's some specific places that do specific things. So the motor cortex is this red strip that runs across. This is the left side of the brain. It also would go down over here on the right side. So in my brain, it would be this strip right across here. And the motor cortex is the area that controls voluntary movement. So when I'm moving my hands right now, it's the motor cortex that's doing that. I'm moving my lips, the motor cortex is doing that. I'm running, any voluntary movement is happening there. In this graphic, it's showing you the motor cortex. It's like pulling it out of the brain. And it's showing you how much of that strip of brain is dedicated to processing information for each body part. So you can see that the face takes up a huge proportion of the motor cortex because so much movement is going on right here. It's so important. The lips in particular are huge because our mouth and our movements of our mouth are so important. The hand is also huge. It takes up a ton of space in the motor cortex because our hands and our movements and our fine motor skills are so important. Okay, what about this purple strip? This is the sensory cortex, and it would be right across, just behind the motor cortex. It receives information from the skin surface and the sense organs. So from your nose, your ears, your eyes, that information is coming into the sensory cortex and from your skin. This graphic shows how the space is split up for different parts of the body. Again, the hand and the face get a lot more space on the parietal lobe than anything else. Okay, where is vision processed? It's back here in the visual cortex, which just a minute ago I said was the occipital lobe. So you can kind of call it either one. An MRI scan will show that it is active when subjects look at a face. This is the MRI scan, and you can see how it's lighting up. Auditory function is processed on the side. It's calling it the auditory cortex. Before I was saying it's the temporal lobe. So the auditory cortex is in the temporal lobe. An MRI also shows that this part is active when people are hallucinating. If they're hearing voices, that part of their brain is actually active. So it's something is going on there, even though there's no actual exterior stimulation. Okay, moving right along. There's parts of the cerebral cortex that are not dedicated to any of the things I just mentioned. The sensory cortex, motor cortex, etc. And those parts are pink. And you can, or in this diagram, they're pink. I think they're really gray. So all these areas are called association areas. They're not committed, but they're doing a lot of thinking and processing information and storing information. And so you can see in these other animals how they have less and less pink. The more sophisticated chimpanzee looks somewhat like us. The cat has less, and the rat has even less. So the brains have definitely evolved in primates and humans in particular. Okay, what about some damage to the brain? There's a couple of specific types of damage we need to know. Aphasia is the word when language is impaired. And aphasia can happen a couple different ways. The two that we're going to be concerned about are Broca's area and Wernicke's area. And you can see them in this diagram. Broca's area right here controls the muscles that are involved in speech. And Wernicke's area is about interpreting language and understanding it. So I think in class I told you my dad had a stroke and his language centers were impaired, particularly Broca's area. So he has trouble making words, but if you ask him questions and he can give you yes or no answers, then he can understand a lot. So his Wernicke's area is not damaged, his Broca's area is damaged. Okay. What does it look like if we did an EEG while people were hearing, seeing, and speaking words? So these images are EEGs. You can see the auditory cortex is lighting up when you're hearing words. When you're seeing words, it's back here in the visual cortex or the occipital lobe. And when you're speaking words, it's up here in Broca's area in the motor cortex. So speech and understanding language involves a lot of different parts of the brain, and they all have to coordinate and work together for you to be able to properly use language. Okay, plasticity is a term we need to know. The brain is plastic, which means it's changeable, it's moldable, just like plastic can be molded into many different shapes and uses. With some illnesses or injuries to the brain, you can rework how the neurons are being used in the brain. And so if someone is damaged in Broca's area, you can retrain the brain. Sometimes it doesn't always work, but you can retrain it so that they can maybe regain some of the speech, some of the muscle control of speech. So that's what brain plasticity is. Usually works more with kids that are younger, and if their brains are not fully formed yet, brains tend to be more plastic. But my dad does tons of therapy, speech therapy, and they're working on retraining the neurons in his brain so that he can regain his ability to speak well. And it's working to a degree. It's not totally working 100%, but it's working some. Okay, what about our divided brain? We know that there's two hemispheres of the brain. They're connected by some tissue called the corpus callosum. What does the left side of the brain specialize in? The 3 L's. Language, logic, and analytic. Okay. Another way to break it down is how they say it here. It helps process reading, writing, speaking, mathematics, and comprehension skills. What about the right brain? Specializes in creativity and visual spatial information. So the right brain is good at geometry because it's visual spatial. The left hemisphere is good at arithmetic because it's logic. When you split the brain, this is what the two hemispheres look like. This view down here is from underneath the brain, and these are the tissues, the corpus callosum connecting it. This is a side view with half the brain removed, and this is looking at the middle of the brain, and this is where the corpus callosum would be connecting them here. Now, there are some cases where doctors intentionally cut the corpus callosum, and these people are referred to as split brain individuals. And there's some unusual things that happen with perception. By the way, doctors do this if the person has a severe type of epilepsy, but you wouldn't do this to anybody unless you really had severe issues that needed to be addressed. So when you have split brain, this is one of the more confusing things, but it's worth learning and it's worth knowing for the AP test. Each hemisphere of the eyeball, or each eyeball, has a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. So in this image, this is the blue here is the left hemisphere of the left eyeball. It's going to see an apple. And the left hemisphere of the right eyeball is also going to see an apple. This is when these two things are flashed very briefly in front of an individual. So the left half of each eye sees the apple. The right half of each eye sees the pencil. Where does that information go? The apple, the left half of each eye, goes to the left half of the brain. And since the left half of the brain controls logic, controls language, then this person, if asked, what did you see? They would say, I saw an apple. They would not say, I saw a pencil. Even though the right half of each eye saw a pencil, that pencil image is in the right hemisphere, and there's no control of language in the right hemisphere. So that's how the split brain patients sometimes see things, and that's how they would communicate them. All right, that's the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, see me in class, read your textbook, but otherwise, I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you again soon. Have a nice day.